You know what it takes to wage a fight against the woke? Not just wage it, but actually win it? You have to be solid in terms of your philosophy of education because they are. And if you're not, you can't even fight them. The reason they are so successful is they know exactly what they believe, they know exactly why they believe it, and they are thoroughly committed to realizing their goals. Thoroughly committed. They live it, they breathe it. It is everything to them. You need to get the same way, and you need to get there fast. So, what am I talking about in terms of philosophy of education? Well, what I mean is, what is education to you? What is it to you in general, but also specifically to your child in terms of what you want them to have, what you call an education, and what is it for? So there's kind of the what is it? And then there's the why is it? Why do you want it? And I mean, well beyond the because the law says I have to do it. Okay, I'm assuming you're here watching this because you care a little bit more than about just being in compliance with the government. So you need to figure out why you care. Really, why you care. And try to go past the pragmatic of, well, I want my kid to be able to get into college or get a job someday. I mean, why? To illustrate my point, I'm going to describe mine for you. Now, you may agree with me, you may disagree with me. That's not really the point. I'm just explaining to you why I find it so easy to come on here every day or every other day and stick my neck out there, attach my name to my opinions, such that anybody who would see this and ever meet me or know me or encounter me would know exactly what I think. And even if they're offended, even if they disagree, etc., I don't care. I don't care. I don't care because I'm thoroughly committed to what I believe, what I think, and why I think it, and what project I'm working on for my kids. 100% committed. I will not be daunted. I will not be shaken. So here's mine. I believe that each and every human child is born with a birthright, and that is first and foremost to be free. I believe wherever they are, I think that is your right as a human to be free. In the United States, I think it's your right as a human and as a citizen. Because when you're born here, you're a citizen. So I believe that is your birthright, to be free. I believe that freedom is yours as an individual and that you as an individual matter to you. I believe my children each matter to themselves, not just to me, and certainly not to something called society. In fact, I don't think they matter all that much to society. I don't. That's certainly not my operating principle. My operating principle is they matter to me and they matter to themselves. And because I feel this way and think this way, I think they need to be educated so they can live life on earth as individuals. I believe they will go through their lives as individuals, even if they make friends, even if they get married, even if they have their own children, etc. They will still essentially be on their own, making decisions every single day for themselves, for their families, for their friendships and relationships. And in order to do that in a way that supports them, supports their immediate needs of survival, but also supports their happiness, their pursuit of happiness, they need to have knowledge. They need to be able to think. So it's not just a matter of having knowledge, like a bunch of facts, knowing how to do things, having basic skills, tools. Tools are awesome, but if they can't think, if They can't decide what to do with the tools. It's kind of pointless. What does it matter if I have a hammer if I don't know what it's for? So my philosophy is pretty simple. What is going to support my children becoming the people they need to be, they want to be, and they have the potential to be as individuals? I personally can't know what that is. What I can do is I can facilitate, I can support their self-discovery, I can guide them, I can put them in touch with other people who can guide them. I can do my level best to refrain from directing too much, projecting too much, from imagining that somehow I'm living vicariously through them, or that somehow they have to right the wrongs of my childhood, or somehow they have to go out into the world and do something as if they owe the world something. I do not believe that my children were born with any obligation to anyone but themselves. Maybe a little bit to their family, but only insofar as they live here, and I really would like them to pick their wet towels up off the floor. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And you might be wondering, but where does like math and science and English fit into that? Well, I suppose it fits in terms of the kinds of knowledge I think they should acquire so they can begin to understand the world, so they can learn how to think critically about the world and themselves in it, is probably contained in books that are written using words in English, because that's the language we speak. And they might want to learn another language. That would be fine, but they first have to start with their native tongue. This is where we live. And I want them to be literate, because if they can read, they're not beholden to anyone else who can read. They can do it for themselves. They don't have to trust someone else to read anything from the, medicine bottle that they just got from the pharmacy, or the contract they need to sign, the rental agreement, the, job application, whatever it might be, in a pragmatic sense. But they also need to be able to read our founding documents for themselves to know what they actually say, so they can know what their rights are and not have to trust someone else to tell them. I want them to be able to read books that entertain them, inform them, inspire them, enlighten them. And to do that, they have to have a relatively large vocabulary and the ability to read. Not just the ability to read as far as decoding, but also to read and understand and even think about what they're reading. And this takes a while. It's not as simple as just learning to decode words. What to do with the words, what the words mean, why this word and not that word. It's important. Yes, I do place a high importance on the written word. I understand that the woke does not, but that is why I am not woke. I also place a pretty high importance on numeracy. Not just math, being able to solve problems, do equations, but numeracy, understanding what numbers mean and what they don't necessarily mean, or that they can be manipulated to convey meaning that may or may not align with reality. Things like statistics. So I want my kids to understand numbers and what they're able to tell and what they're not able to tell. I want them to be able to do math, so to speak, so they can handle money, so they can understand what compounded interest is, so they can save and invest and purchase things wisely, compare costs of things, decide whether a job is a good job for them or not a good job based on their budget and so forth. These are things you need to be able to do to live. Now, beyond that, I think it's a good idea to know math, because you never know what problems you might need to solve that involve them, or you might want to go into a field that requires you to do some math. The same is true, by the way, for literacy, but I just assume that virtually every job is going to require you to read. Not every job is going to require you to do more than arithmetic. As far as science goes, I actually think this is more important even than math, because the scientific method is the same method we use to understand the world around us. That is to say, we look at things we don't yet understand, we've never seen before, and we make observations and we use our five senses to observe, and then we might make a hypothesis to, what is this? Why is this? And then we might test that hypothesis and so on. And when you know what that method is, you are not only better able to use it as the need arises, but you're also better able to know when someone is hoodwinking you and telling you that they know something, that something is true, when in fact they don't know something. And they can't say that something is true. They can't even say it's a theory, because a theory has to be tested. They certainly can't say that it's a true thing, that it's a fact, if they have not gone through the steps of the scientific method. So you kind of have to know what the scientific method is before you can challenge somebody's claim to the truth, right? You have to know to ask, well, did you do this? Do you have this kind of evidence? Do you have any research to show that what you're telling me is true? Because what you just said doesn't align with my five senses and their perception of reality. So I have questions. But you won't even know to ask that. You won't even know to say that if you don't understand the scientific method and its importance. So yeah, I kind of want my kids to know that. Are you sensing a pattern here? That in order for my kids to live life on earth, make good decisions, and interact with others in a way that doesn't put them at the mercy of others, that doesn't create an immediate power imbalance between those who have knowledge and those who don't, my kids have to have knowledge. And they have to be able to think about that knowledge so they can then acquire more knowledge. That's how it works. The woke don't want any of this. That is not the project they are working on. They're working on a completely different project. I'm thinking of my child as an individual and your children as individuals. I'm on this channel trying to help you protect your individual child. You don't hear me talking about society. I might talk about the republic because I do think that this country as a free country, as our Constitution describes, is not long for this world if we do not go back to treating individuals as individuals. I think equal rights in this country will go by the wayside before too long if we don't do that. And then what is America anymore? The American creed will no longer be in effect. So you might hear me talk about that, but that's not the same thing as saying that you or I or anybody else has some obligation. We should be wanting to do that for ourselves, for our children, for the people we care about. It's not because we're obligated. There's a difference. They believe you're obligated to society, that you as an individual do not have inherent worth, except insofar as the power you wield to advance something called social justice. So the first thing you need to learn in your education is that the world is an unjust place. That's the first order of business. You need to learn the world is an unjust place. You were born into this place that is full of problems. It is unjust. It is full of inequalities, and that you, little child, are obligated to fix it. Yes, you little 6-year-old kindergartner, you're obligated to fix it. Now, if you have white skin, you have more obligation because you apparently created the inequities. If you have anything other than white skin, you have less obligation, but you still have obligation to know the history, the true history, so to speak, and to become critically conscious. Yes, at the age of 6, younger, they would like probably 3. And the purpose of becoming critically conscious, which by the way is the number one thing the education should deliver to you. If you learn nothing else, you should learn that. Whether you read very well or do math or do science, not really as important as you being critically conscious of all the inequities in the world so that you can go out as a young adult and fight them and achieve some kind of social justice. If you happen to learn to read and write, do math along the way, that's, it's fine as long as they're learned purely as practical skills that you could then turn towards your mindless, unthinking, drone-like pursuit of social justice. Because you won't really have any inclination to formulate your own thoughts, your own dreams, your own hopes outside of social justice because you won't be given time to do it, nor will you be given the experience of thinking, questioning, challenging, being challenged, made uncomfortable in a way that causes you to think using reason and logic. That's not going to happen. They don't want that, actually. Because you see, if you could use reason, if you could use logic and start to deconstruct arguments and challenge arguments and make counter arguments, nothing they're teaching you would make sense. You'd have to look around and see, but the world as compared, for example, to the historical world is actually really good. There's been a ton of progress. Things are not worse than they've ever been. Things are not even all that bad. That's not to say they're perfect, but they're a far sight better than they have ever been. And they are certainly a far sight better in the United States than they would be in most other countries on the planet. And freedom is actually a good thing. And here's why. The statistics, the math show it. They absolutely do. Whether it's poverty, hunger, disease, etc. The facts show that things are not so unjust. And even some of those inequities might actually be just. They might, some of them, be deserved, be earned. Some of them maybe not. But it does not follow that in order to fix those that are not, we have to completely upend everything and destroy everything, because that would be destroying a whole lot of good. But see, they're not going to teach your child any of that. They're not interested in doing that, because if they did, then there would be no pursuit of social justice. Now, you might wonder, why are they pursuing social justice then if things are really not all that bad? Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, they don't see that they're not that bad because they were educated this way. Many of them. If they're under a certain age, I'd say if they're younger than 40, they were probably educated with this kind of educational philosophy. It's a postmodern philosophy. We can't really know reality. Don't trust your lying eyes. Things really are bad. How do we know things are bad? Because we look around and see that there aren't equal outcomes. Everybody isn't the same. Utopia has not been achieved. Therefore, everything is terrible. They haven't learned history, so they literally can't compare it to the past. All they see is the here and now. And those of us who have been taught history are baffled, and it doesn't make sense. And what I'm here to tell you is don't waste a lot of time trying to have this make sense. All you need to know is they have a philosophy. It's different from yours, and it does not result that their goal, their ultimate goal, is not an educated person the way you might think of an educated person. Their ultimate goal is a critically conscious person. Not even a critically conscious person, a critically conscious bundle of identities hell-bent on achieving something called social justice, which apparently is an end unto itself because they can't define it, they can't describe it, they can't tell us what it would look like. It's just this revolution out there on the horizon that they must get started. And after the revolution, everything will become clear. So if that's not what you have in mind for your child, if you don't want your child to come home someday and pretty much hate you and tell you everything that's wrong with you because all they can see is what's wrong, that's all they can do. If that's not what you want, if you want them to have basic skills plus the ability to use them, to use their minds, if you don't want the school to immediately set about tearing down their protective boundaries that keep them feeling like an individual, capable of defending themselves, advocating for themselves, formulating their own dreams. If you don't want those to be torn down and replaced with something the teacher wants, the school wants, the government wants, then you don't want them in the public schools, because that is the project they're working on. Make no mistake. That is what they're doing. No matter what else they say, that's what they're doing. That's why all of their descriptions of what they're going to teach your kid don't really make sense, and you get a brain cramp trying to read them. They aren't meant to make sense. It would be like trying to read the instructions to build a piece of IKEA furniture and expecting a narrative tale. It's just a set of instructions. That's it. What has so many words in their descriptions is really just a set of instructions that add up to an activist. We're going to do this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, and we're going to get a very angry person who's willing to go out and throw themselves in front of whatever is brought to bear to defend liberty, because believe me, there will be something brought to bear. People are not going to give up their freedom passively. It might seem like they would after this past year, but I tend to doubt it. So that's what these kids are setting themselves up for. They're setting themselves up for either trying to go and take people's liberty by force, hoping they don't get any pushback, or being on the receiving end of the pushback and not making it out alive. And I hate to sound so dark and grim and scary, but that's where this goes if it's not stopped. We have history as our guide. We have the Chinese Cultural Revolution as our guide. We have the French Revolution as our guide. We have other revolutions where people got all filled with idealism and the purpose of revolution for its own sake without really having a clear picture of what would be on the other side. And it usually results in a lot of destruction and death. There's certainly no way you can set aside literacy, math, science, reason for this amount of time in a child's education and have anything constructive on the other end. You're going to have a very angry person with all this critical consciousness and no skills. Not a good combination. If you have no way to earn a living, no way to conceive of happiness because you can't think, that's a kind of misery that cannot be dealt with. So even if that misery and rage is not turned outward, it will be turned inward. And now you're dealing with someone mentally ill and self-destructive. Not much better. I think we're already seeing that. I say look around at the high rates of admission to behavioral health in the last year alone amongst children and teens. And I think you already see that. And people say it's because of the pandemic and it's because of isolation. That might have fed it. But I don't think perfectly mentally healthy kids who were, suddenly isolated and on, the computer are going to behavioral health in those high numbers out of the blue. I don't believe that. I think these kids were already suffering. They were already anxious. They were already self-loathing in many cases, self-conscious. And this just made it worse. Because in the past year, as we all know, this type of curriculum was intensified. They just kept going, but more because of George Floyd, because of, the election, because of all of these instigating factors. These teachers doubled down. And I think that's why we saw it. You will see it increase more in this coming year, I predict. If we are still having this conversation a year from now, I think it will be obvious how detrimental this is to mental health in our children and teens. So like I said at the outset, you need to have a philosophy of education. You need to figure out what it is very clearly, and you need to get very attached to it. They're very attached to theirs. And they're counting on you not knowing what yours is or tinkering around the edges, nipping at their heels, and not really being willing to stand your ground and say, no, this is completely unacceptable. This is not an education at all. It's not just this is the wrong curriculum, but this isn't even an education. Even if we remove the specific lesson plans, they're not teaching your child about reality. They're not teaching your child chronological history. They're not teaching your child history as a story of the world at all. They're teaching it as a set of struggles to be internalized for psychological purposes, not for the acquisition of knowledge and understanding of human life on planet Earth. Very different project. So that's what I was thinking about today. I thought I would share it with you because it really is fundamental. You'll hear a lot of things from people about how to fight this. And some people will say we need a ban. Some people will say we just need school choice. Others will say we need to just replace this culturally relevant or culturally responsive education with a different kind of culturally responsive education. We need to replace social emotional learning with a nicer, softer, gentler social emotion, whatever. And that's their opinion. I just disagree. I think we know how our kids should be taught. It's never really been done in our public schools. I think we need to go back to the beginning and start over. And what they're doing right now is taking what was already a pretty lousy system and making it something truly sinister. So tinkering around the edges isn't going to work. It's not going to work. And it's not going to work anyway, because the activists and the teachers unions and the teachers are so committed to their philosophy. They're not interested in your new math or your better version of English. You can throw in a few books to, placate them. That's not what they're after. They're not after the kids reading those specific titles. They're after anything and everything they can use and do to prevent the acquisition of knowledge and the development of reason. That's it. That's all they want to do. They just want your kid at the end of 13 years to be an activist. As many as they can get. They know they're not going to get all of them. They know that. They know that you're going to interfere from home. They know that some people will homeschool. They know that some people will go to private schools that aren't doing this woke garbage. Many of them are, unfortunately. But they're going to get the majority, and they know that. They know that. And that's why they don't yet fight back too hard against homeschooling, because they're still getting the majority. They probably will at some point fight back against homeschooling if enough people pull out, but it's going to be a lot harder for them to do that than it's going to be to keep your child in the school. If your child is already there and they start getting the sense that too many people are leaving, just like with East Germany, they will put up walls to prevent any new homeschoolers. Mark my words. So if you have the slightest inclination to create your child's education on your own, I suggest you do. Immediately. I mean that. I'm not trying to be a doomsday prophet. I'm just trying to be realistic about how these people operate. I understand the project they're working on. I think I understand the one you would like to be working on, even if you haven't articulated it yet in your own mind. And every day you expose your child to their project is a day that makes it less likely you will ever be able to work towards yours for your kid. So I hope you give this some thought, some serious thought. And I'm here for you if you need help trying to do it yourself. I mean it. I will do what I can to help you. So with that, I thank you for watching. If you find this content helpful, useful, informative, please thumbs up, share, comment, subscribe to the channel, and join my locals if you want to get some help. Have a great evening.